right, great to see you guys. Hopefully you can bear with me. I know coffee will hopefully be soon during lunch, and I'm just honored to take up some space during this meeting and to share a little bit about my research and career development and how those journeys have intertwined in about 30 minutes. So stay tuned. So I'm from University of Minnesota. Great to be here today, and here are some of my disclosures. I'll be talking about a couple of my grants throughout. And also, being at the University of Minnesota, and for many folks probably here as well, based on where your university is positioned, I always want to acknowledge the land that my university sits on, and not just acknowledge, but to discuss my commitment to working alongside the diverse and rich, vibrant American Indian tribal nations and communities that I get to call collaborators. And so I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, but for me it's important not just to acknowledge, but to really be actionable in really trying to build trust with my community partners. So I'm going to talk about my role in commercial tobacco control. And I use the word commercial purposely here, and in a couple slides I'll talk a bit about traditional tobacco and how it's really important to make that distinction among the communities that I have the honor to work alongside. So here's just a really brief slide. It's amazing how you can sum up a lot of milestones in one slide. And also I want to mention my positionality. So I identify as a white woman, and this is important throughout my work and my relationships with community to think about my position and to ensure that really I'm in this listening mode often and really trying to build trust, listen to my community partners, provide my expertise, assist them in their pursuit toward health equity. And so I often do reflect on my positionality throughout. And this is really, for me, a lifelong evolving goal to make sure that I am responding well and building that trust with community. So as mentioned, I have my PhD in epidemiology, and during that time, as epidemiologists do, I was really flexing my skills in looking at trends, particularly in lung cancer. I'll show that in a couple slides. A lot of my work was very observational, quantitative in nature, and really just trying to show, who are we leaving behind? How can we better serve certain communities based on geography, as well as race, ethnicity, gender, identity, and so forth. So most of my PhD was at a computer doing that and then presenting. Then I went on to do a postdoc, and what I really wanted to do was to position myself in a way that I wasn't just describing. I felt this itch to really go beyond describing to collaborating and helping to address. And fortunately, I was able to do some of that during my postdoc and really develop skills in community engagement with a particular tribal nation and a urban clinic serving American Indian persons, and to develop skills in randomized controlled trials, which I frankly had none at the time when I did my postdoc. And now here I am in 2023, and what I like to do is both of those now. I think they're very complementary. We can learn a lot from understanding who's doing well, who's being left behind, and use those results to inform hypotheses, research questions, and ultimately the goal is to move that needle on health equity. Okay, as I mentioned during my epidemiology, and still do a lot of epidemiology to this day, a lot of my works focused around looking at who we were leaving behind at a state level in Oklahoma. And so again, it's amazing how one slide can summarize a lot of what you do for about 4 or 5 years, but here it is. And essentially, this slide was really motivating for me. So what it shows is that over a decade of time in Oklahoma, that for some of our populations, specifically white adults and African American adults in Oklahoma, we're seeing declines in lung cancer incidence. And often we were looking at lung cancer because we know about 80 to 90% of all lung cancer cases are due to smoking itself or secondhand smoke exposure. There's definitely additional exposures, environmental exposures like radon, But from a commercial tobacco control perspective, we can really look at lung cancer rates to see how we're doing, how we can do better. I think what this graph also shows is a startling reality of our lack of impact on health equity. So over time, there is a widening gap between our American Indian communities in Oklahoma and our white and African American communities. And so to me, this was really motivating and really catapulted me into a career that wanted to go both from describing to addressing. So as I mentioned when I started my talk, I'm very purposeful about words. I know words are very impactful, and as we were discussing earlier, some of my community partners do refer American Indian, some prefer Native American, Indigenous, and just always evolving and listening to community with their preferred word. When it comes to tobacco, it's really important to make that distinction between traditional tobacco and commercial tobacco. And so you can read a quote on the right from a tribal knowledge holder about his relationship with traditional tobacco or Sema. You can also see in this photo here, it's actually a colleague of mine's daughter, how to really help many of our American Indian communities reclaim the use of that cultural practice and tradition while also motivating them to quit smoking or commercial tobacco. It was important to include that language in their smoke-free campaigns. I also have really learned context matters. I always cringe when I see data points that really show cancer disparities, health disparities, and there's no context applied to that. As we talked or learned from the director's presentation, context is really important. So within the American Indian community and the communities that I have the honor to work with, there are various reasons for the higher prevalence of commercial tobacco. One is, and a large factor that really transcends till today, is the U.S. colonization efforts and religious persecution. So it's hard to believe, but just until the late 1970s, our American Indian communities were not allowed to practice traditional tobacco. And so for that reason, a lot of those cultural practices were lost. There was a lack of connection with traditional tobacco, and commercial tobacco became, for so many, a way to connect still with tobacco. And so that you can just see how that can be very, cause a lot of grief, but also a very complex relationship there. Also, there is a very strong presence from the tobacco industry. They know what they're doing. They identify their target markets, and American Indian persons are one of those. And they have used branding, advertising, promotional materials to attract new youth who are not using tobacco and transition them into dependence. And one example of this is probably seen in the store, these packs of cigarettes called American Spirits. And they use native imagery for their branding, almost to portray that this is not commercial, this is more traditional tobacco. And that has led to a lot of confusion among youth. Discrimination, historical traumas is another factor that we talk a lot about within community. The resiliency that runs through a lot of my colleagues and communities is beautiful in getting through a lot of the generational trauma that is carried through them from grandparents, great-grandparents, being forced to boarding schools, and for so many today, smoking can be a coping mechanism. And then the area that I have focused a lot of my work on and tried to tie in some of these other bullet points is smoking cessation resources and services. Frankly, there's a lack of resources that are focused and address both the needs and the beautiful cultures of American Indian peoples. And so this has been a huge calling for me to go from that area of describing to addressing. So as part of my describing work, one of the papers that we recently published with a colleague from Oklahoma, Dr. Ashley Cole, was looking at, okay, let's take everyone who ever smoked, and then let's look at among those who are now former smokers. And you can see this large disparity where if we use the comparison of the white population for a construct of having more access, more privileges, how are American Indian persons doing? And we saw that the odds of cessation were over their lifetime were significantly lower. We also saw this among Black and African American adults. And so really pointing to data that shows, look, we need more efforts in this space to help our American Indian communities do what they want, which is quitting smoking. So a lot of my journey has been around becoming an ally and reflecting on what is my role in this work. This is an evolving question I ask myself, why do I need to have a seat at the table? What is my contribution to this public health matter? And the doors for me and my community partners keep opening. I keep getting asked to be brought back to the table. So as long as that continues, I'm going to continue to really try and do my best to serve these communities. So as mentioned, I've been very fortunate with my community partners to receive some grants. And they're laid out here, and they're a combination of both external and internal grants that have really been able to foster a lot of the work that I have been fortunate to undertake. And a lot of it really starts with the K01 that I was fortunate to receive back in 2020. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that work and how this grant really has been quite pivotal in my career, not only with the research I've been able to focus on, but with the time that I've been able to really devote to building relationships and continuing this work. So it was very fortunate that the time when I joined a postdoc at the University of Minnesota, there was a tribe that was really interested in these new buzzwords, the All of Us campaign that we probably saw out front. It's coming all full circle for me. And precision medicine or personalized medicine, which I always chuckle a little bit because some of my colleagues who are clinicians have said, well, we've always been doing personalized medicine. Now we just have a couple more tools in our toolkit when it comes to using genetics to inform treatment. So this is, and I apologize, I don't have a data point on here for the time. This was data from about 2012, so it's about a decade old, but it was from when the tribe had most recent data on their smoking prevalence. And so while we see nationwide, I think the data point was about 23% of American Indian persons are currently smoking, we see some strikingly higher prevalences in certain communities and tribal nations in Minnesota and elsewhere across the United States. So the tribe saw this. They knew that as many as 2 in 3 of their adults were someday or current everyday smokers, and really wanted to tackle this problem. And again, this was within the context of, okay, what can we do around personalized medicine for smoking cessation treatment? So at this time, I had no skills in smoking cessation treatment, right? I'm an epidemiologist. I have developed some skills in community engagement, but I had yet to really learn about, what does it mean to go through nicotine withdrawal? How can we best prepare people to quit smoking? How do they track their triggers? How can we provide them support? What type of pharmacotherapy is available if that is of interest to the individual? And what do we think about through those options? So as part of my K, it was very obvious to me that if I'm going to be able to respond to the community partners and address commercial tobacco use and help people quit smoking, I need to go get some skills in this area. And so for me, this was part of my career development goals, was to get training through this certificate program, but also through some mentorship throughout. And this was like a 5-day training program. So now that I have developed this tool set of treatment, essentially, one of the areas that the tribe, that we presented to the tribe and that they were really interested in pursuing and looking at, or at least laying some pilot data for a future study, was this concept around personalized smoking cessation treatment. And there's a couple different ways that there have been researchers looking into this. And I would say most of the evidence right now is based on the nicotine metabolite ratio. So this is a biomarker that you can measure in your blood, saliva, or urine of people who currently smoke. And you're taking 2 ratios of the major metabolites of nicotine. And if we all just hypothetically smoked in here, you would see a diverse range of slow metabolizers to normal metabolizers to fast metabolizers. So there's a lot of what they call underlying the gene that is primarily responsible for nicotine metabolism, polymorphic nature in that gene. And so this is interesting because there had been some early studies that show nicotine metabolism, If you think about just like with food metabolism, if you're a heavier metabolizer, you're gonna need to replace it more often. So if you metabolize nicotine more quickly, you're going to need to consume nicotine more often. And so what they found, and very clear in some of the research, is that nicotine metabolism is associated with smoking heaviness, time to first cigarette in the morning, and is, again, a nice way to think about why some people might smoke more than others. So this study was done in 2016 and has been followed up by some others. Essentially what they did is they took people who smoke, and at baseline they looked at their nicotine metabolite ratio. I believe this study was in plasma, their nicotine metabolite ratio, and then they randomized them to either varenicline or Chantix. You've probably seen the commercial with the cold turkey. It's like, don't quit cold turkey, use Chantix. This is a prescription medication that actually binds at the nicotine receptors and makes nicotine less pleasurable. There's nicotine patch, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. You just throw it on your arm, and then placebo, which was no medication at all. And so what this study showed was what I think is actually still in research settings, but I think it does have some implications for clinical practice, and hence why the community partner I was working with was very interested in starting to lay the foundation for this, is that if you're a slow metabolizer, there's probably no gain whether or not you use Chantix or nicotine patch. They seem to have similar quit rates, but your side effects are lower on nicotine patch. So if you wanted to get a smoking cessation medication, side effects are a big thing. That impacts compliance, ultimately efficacy. So if you're a slow metabolizer, your first line would be recommended nicotine patch. If you're a fast metabolizer, they did see that Chantix or varenicline greatly outperformed nicotine patch, and actually side effects there were no different. And so for those individuals, you would be recommended Chantix. So what we did was a small pilot study with a tribal nation in Minnesota to really begin to lay out the groundwork. So we were able to show that we recruited about 60 individuals who identified as American Indian to the tribal clinic in northern Minnesota. We collected data to look at their nicotine metabolite ratio. We asked them about their self-preference for smoking cessation medications. And then we also asked them about their interests or how they would view taking part in like a personalized medicine approach to smoking cessation. So some of the things that we provided back to the tribe was that the nicotine metabolite ratio did track with smoking heaviness in the community. And so that's great because it shows that there is that mechanism there that we would likely see carry over into smoking cessation treatment selection being optimal based on that clinical trial. We also showed that about 1 in 2 people did not have a self-preference for the cessation medication that matched their nicotine metabolite ratio. And this is not surprising. About half the people were normal metabolizers, and they should have, if we did this approach, Chantix would be preferred to them based on their nicotine metabolite ratio, but most people prefer nicotine replacement therapy. There's a lot of stigma around Chantix, a lot of concerns with side effects, and so this again was taken back to the tribe to show if we do pursue this, about 1/2 of the people would be more optimally fit with their smoking cessation medication. What we also did was, as I mentioned, we looked at perspectives. We know that some of these approaches this particular approach involves collection of a biological sample. There is justifiable distrust for many people to participate in a practice that involves submitting a sample. And I think this is very much amplified in our American Indian communities who have been exploited in research, exploited in studies. And so what we wanted to do is to look at what would be their viewpoints and perceptions on smoking cessation if personalized. And in doing that, we thought, well, we should ask them about nicotine replacement therapy in general, varenicline in general, because those are really the 2 pillars of personalized medicine. And I also want to show that this is an infographic that we are developing for the community. Something that I strive to do in all of my research is, yes, I have to publish. I'm in academia. My community partners know that. But also, what can I give back to the community that's going to be engaging, tangible, that will live beyond the grant or the research so that they can use it. And I've been honored to work alongside some colleagues who have developed a lot of infographics and booklets that are really appealing to community. And so we're attempting to do that, as you see here. And what we found from the personalized medicine approach in itself was that there was about 70% of the population that we surveyed that was in our sample that were interested in using this approach. And that was really positive to us. We thought, wow, there is acceptability, sure there's concerns, but maybe this approach would be palatable for the community shall it enter clinical practice in the future. We also looked at other ways. For example, a really contentious area of debate right now in the commercial tobacco field is e-cigarettes and whether or not they're a positive or negative thing. And our particular community was not very much interested in using those for quit smoking. So for me, I think that data point is pretty telling on whether or not any studies like that would happen with this community. So the really exciting thing is that the work that I was able to do alongside the tribal nation in Minnesota, we realized there was some unique attributes to it. One, it was this academic tribal collaboration. It involved biological samples, which I think is another layer of trust that needs to be developed so that community is willing to participate in these types of studies. And so we basically wrote about a framework for directed at researchers to be able to build relationship with tribal nations who are sovereign. They are at the same level as our federal government, so there's some unique situations you have to think through. For example, a memorandum of understanding or a research agreement. What can we do to really protect the community and give them the power to oversee the research? And this roadmap has since been cited by some others as a roadmap for engaging other underrepresented populations in research, which is really, really exciting to see that it has a ripple effect. Speaking of effects, so one of the things I was reflecting on in coming to talk to you guys about my career is what I consider the butterfly effect. I think many people know what that is. You see a very small, dainty butterfly land on water, and it ripples out and has effects beyond what we might imagine. And I think everything that I have been fortunate and honored to do with community has had some type of butterfly effect, and something that might seem so small or going to a conference or building a relationship can really build and grow and foster into really exciting grants that I'll talk about as we go through. So one of the really exciting partnerships that I have been able to engage in due to being able to protect my time on my K is a partnership with Bad River Tribe. So this was very just kind of random. I was at a conference, I was presenting on my research, and one of the public health individuals from the Wisconsin Quit Line for smoking cessation came up to me and said, look, we have this tribe who's really, and there's a tribal councilman who's really interested in developing a smoking cessation program for the community. Frankly, we don't have the resources to support them, but your research seems to be right on point, and you might have a future collaboration together and can really help serve this community. So I have visited Bad River several times, and Wisconsin's beautiful. Went out there, got to know Dylan well. We really talked about what he wanted to do for the community. And it was this idea that for us to quit commercial smoking, we really need to reclaim traditional tobacco. We need to reclaim our cultural practices. There's a yearning for tobacco that will always be there for spiritual and well-being. And so if we're going to talk about quitting smoking, we have to replace that with traditional tobacco and bring back these practices. And so I thought, that sounds amazing and beautiful. So we wrote a small pilot grant and got funded, actually a couple, over the past couple years to develop a smoking cessation program specifically for the clinic at Bad River, and then to implement it. So this is just two of the guidebooks that are used in the smoking cessation program that I co-developed with Dylan. The one on the left is an outcome of about 10 to 15 interviews that Dylan led with tribal knowledge holders, elders in the community on their relationship with traditional tobacco, what goes into the mixtures, some basics on harvesting, what do we think about, what are some of the stories around traditional tobacco, and it created this guidebook. We also got a indigenous artist from Bad River to develop artwork for these guidebooks, which, as you can see, are just quite beautiful. And this guidebook on the left is not for public use, it's for Bad River. There's a lot of stories and narratives that are secretive within the community. And so this guidebook is not one that can be publicly shared. The one on the right, however, is one where we realize, okay, if we're gonna really learn about reclaiming traditional tobacco and these beautiful practices, how do we also use this program to prepare people to quit smoking? Identifying their triggers, talking to them about pharmacotherapy, or even seeking out help from a traditional healer, all these elements that really go into preparing to quit, quitting, and then how to handle relapse when it does occur. And so we took a guidebook that was developed in the 1990s for tribes in Northern California. So we started with a guidebook that was developed with American Indian persons in mind, by American Indian persons, but was neither tailored to the area and it was outdated. So for example, pharmacotherapy, like the nicotine patches, Chantix, those hadn't come into the marketplace until late 1990s or early 2000s. And so we knew we needed to integrate those. We also integrated some of the worldviews and cultural values that are relied on by the Bad River tribe within this guidebook. And this guidebook is available for sharing. We've actually been asked by some of the Minnesota tribes to have this guidebook and have tailored it to reflect some of the Minnesota Ojibwe communities. So it's exciting to see how really we took about $25,000, developed this program, created guidebooks for the community, and now there is a way to share what we learn and develop with others who might be interested in it. And one of the models that I think this study shows, and is one that I'm really excited about being a part of, is this idea of braiding indigenous science and indigenous practices with Western science. And that's exemplified through a braid. Okay, here's the butterfly effect. So during that study, so I should say we developed, that took about 9 months to a year to develop these resources, mainly the one on the left because it involved qualitative research. And then we implemented a small pilot program of about 5 individuals. They went through the program, provided us pretty in-depth feedback. The exciting thing is the clinic just decided this past year to start the program back up. And so it's really being now implemented by the clinic, within the clinic, and I think is a nice example of like impact and implementation. So one of the challenges that the pilot participants mentioned was, yes, this is wonderful, but we know there's a lot of our friends, our relatives, our family members who would have loved to attend these, but due to transportation, childcare, work schedule, it's challenging when you have to show up once a week for an hour or two at a set time that works best for the group. So one of the things that came out of this was the idea of like having digital resources to really kind of wrap around the community and expand beyond the clinic. So we thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds great. And actually we had looked at some of the prior clinical trials that have been published by Dr. Wan Chow, one of my, I consider a mentor. And one of the big limitations of these clinical trials, while they had many strengths, was requiring people to come in person, and that transportation and loss to follow-up was a huge burden on the study and reduce the statistical power. And so we thought, wow, there is additional, we have the community voice that wants it, then we also have these scientific papers that point to digital resources being potential for reducing some of the limitations of other studies. So when we started thinking about a digital resource, my colleagues and I looked around, and none of us had any experience with developing digital resources or apps or text-based programs, but we did have the experience with community engagement, intervention development. I work closely with the American Indian Cancer Foundation, and their whole history has been tailoring campaigns, cancer prevention campaigns, cancer screening campaigns to be inclusive as much as possible of all the diverse and rich cultures of American Indian persons, because there's not one single identity that is American Indian. And so we thought, okay, let's go with what is currently being used, what is evidence-based, and let's take it to our community members and our partners, ask them what they like about it, what they don't like about it, not rocket science here, and then take their feedback and develop a tailored version of it, test it, and show the National Cancer Institute or public funders of any type of public health resources why they should fund a tailored version of an app for smoking cessation for this community. So this is the app. It's called Quick Guide, and you can actually download it. It's publicly available. It was developed through the National Cancer Institute, and it has a lot of really evidence-based features, tracking your smoke-free days, tracking your triggers, whether it's having an alcoholic beverage, hanging out with friends, being bored, and then strategies for quitting. And so this on the right is our investigative team and a couple of the individuals who really are my close collaborators and dear friends. I don't know if I have I think I do have a mouse. This is Wyatt Pickner. He's at the American Indian Cancer Foundation, is the research manager and a dear friend of mine, collaborator, colleague. He's one that I go to really reflect on my positionality, how should I go about doing this? Should I even be going to do this? So we have a really good, trusting relationship. Antony Stately is the director at the Native American Community Clinic in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then Dylan right here, who has been able to continue on all the collaborations since the clinic-based program that we developed. There's other individuals that are at the university. So what we also did was recognize that, look, yeah, we have some ideas about what would be good, but one of the things that we're trying to do is create a resource that is inclusive of the many cultures of American Indian peoples. And so we created a community advisory board. We actually somehow got them to come to Minnesota in January, which I think just shows you their interest in this resource and their buy-in and the excitement that we had. And so with them, what we did is we showed them the prototype, showed them what we were thinking of doing, the exact content pages that we were implementing into the Quick Guide, and did what's kind of like this World Cafe style engagement technique where each table had a specific content page from the app, and they looked over it, they talked about what they liked, what they didn't like, and they moved on, and a new table came to that table and built on what the prior table talked about. And it's a really good way to engage people kind of rapidly. I mean, this was a 2-day meeting. I take that back, it was a 1-day meeting. So we had precious time, and we needed to get their input as much as possible and reduce the burden on them outside the meeting. And so this is a really awesome engagement technique that I can share more of if you guys want to after. So this is just essentially the Quick Guide R21 study. It's exciting. We are 95% of our way done with recruitment. I think last I checked with my team, we meet weekly. We'll meet again tomorrow. I think we're about 90, we have about 105 participants randomized. And this is American Indian persons who currently smoke cigarettes, and they either get to use the standard version of the app, which is evidence-based. It still has the components to help with quitting smoking, or that version plus the culturally aligned pieces. And one of the things that we did to inform that culturally aligned app is the qualitative research that that was shown in aim 1 of that prior slide. And again, this is just, there's a lot here. A couple of things I want to just draw your attention to is this is an infographic that was developed for the community partners to take back, to put in their clinics, because while the themes that we learn from our interviewees help inform a digital app, you could also imagine these themes being helpful for culturally tailoring an in-person smoking cessation program, and so they could have impact beyond. One of the things that we really liked too was this asset-based framing. So thinking about ways to really help facilitate quitting smoking, and that was promoting ways to heal and address grief and trauma, providing access to traditional tobacco, helping people connect with community through the app and learn about their own traditions. And so these are components that we have attempted to put into the app and see how they help increase engagement with the app, because we know if you increase engagement, it's likely that you'll increase efficacy. Here's just some of the pages. I think when I told my mom I was helping make an app, she thought, oh my gosh, what is this going to look like? And we, of course, had wonderful graphic designers from the American Indian Cancer Foundation help with us. We also used that artist from Bad River who made that floral design. Persons that use the tailored version can tailor their wallpaper, so her artwork shows up there. And so really it's, this combination of all these efforts resulting in this new tailored resource. One of the things to the app, we added new triggers because we know that that's an evidence-based way of quitting, is if you can track those. And so we found through our qualitative work some new triggers to integrate, like feeling grief or experiencing loss, boredom, anxiousness, or nervousness. A lot of our participants had anxiety, for example, and so we were able to include those for their tracking purposes. Last thing I want to say about this, and then I'm going to breeze through the rest of my slides, is that we also leaned on others with the development. So one of SAMHSA's curriculums is called Gathering of Native Americans, and they use these worldviews, mastery, belonging, interdependence, and generosity, to bring an asset-based approach to substance abuse prevention and cessation. And so we have aligned a lot of our materials with this framework. So again, what does the community want? How can we use existing literature to further inform these efforts? And this is some pilot data that we submitted in our R01 that's currently under review. So this was back in April when we pulled it. And essentially, these are the self-report constructs looking at whether our tailored version does better than our standard version. And so how do you look at what does better mean? So we looked at engagement, and we do see that more individuals using the tailored version were engaging. More individuals who were using the tailored version would recommend it to a friend versus the standard. And then, of course, which was good to see too, is that there were more individuals using the tailored version who said it fits their culture. So that was exciting, and I'll be thrilled to see the final results and share what that will look like when we have finished recruitment. So as I mentioned, now we have this guidebook, we have this app, and finally, the last butterfly effect I'll leave you with is the National Cancer Institute came to us and said, wow, you guys are doing some really interesting efforts. You're developing this quick guide app. Would you help also tailor the smoke-free text version, which is an automated text program of about 6 weeks that helps people quit smoking. At the current time, there was a general population one, and they wanted us to take our findings and what we put into the quick guide for natives into their smoke-free text program. And so we're audience testing right now. It's been about a year of going through over 300 text messages with Wyatt, sitting over a lot of coffee, convening our community advisory board, and have a prototype that we're now getting some feedback from in-depth interviews among American Indian persons who smoke to see, okay, is this interesting? Is this engaging? Does this align with your culture? So it's really exciting because we also have always been under the belief that there's not going to be one resource that works for everybody. I mean, some people in here, while we have all this technology, you love to hold that paper copy of a book, right? Some people really like an app. Some people would prefer like a text program. Texting's a big thing these days. And so we've really moved to this model of creating a suite of resources for American Indian persons to help them quit smoking. And that is actually the foundation for the R01 that we now have under review. Fingers crossed. Who knows how that will go, but essentially it builds on some of this pilot testing we're doing to test this suite of resources and see how it does. And the exciting thing about this project, and one that as I started out with my positionality, I know I've been dealt privileges in life, and I'm here in an academic setting, and how can I build up my community partners on these grants? So one of our goals is that my definition of success will be when the American Indian Cancer Foundation can apply for a grant as a PI and no longer need me, right? And so how do I get them there? And so the R21, why it was a COI, and frankly, we work as multiple PIs. The RO1 has Wyatt on as a multiple PI, and he has an MPH by his name. He has his lived experience that is beyond what a PhD could ever give anyone. And so it will be really exciting to see how this gets reviewed, and eventually how the American Indian Cancer Foundation can use this to build their own internal capacity to lead their own larger scale grants. So I want to leave you with, I am still learning, right? It all looks linear, and yes, we've been busy, but I think one of the big junctures I'm at now is, oh my gosh, how do you lead a research team effectively? I don't feel like I was taught this very well. I'm leaning on a lot of leadership books, but I will say we're figuring out as we go. I'm a new leader, my team's relatively young. We're learning about clinical trials as we go. There's also a unique aspect that we are a community engaged research team, so I'm very purposeful on who I bring onto my research team. Are they gonna be working on their cultural humility and building trust? So there's a lot of thoughts that go into when hiring folks for my research, but these are really those that are doing the day-to-day and making this presentation come to life, and I'm very appreciative of them. And then last but not least, I was telling my chair of my division, it's sort of uncomfortable to receive an award that reflects your community as well. And so I just reflected on that coming here and want to leave you with the fact that I have these amazing individuals that I get to collaborate with and call friends. And it's really this team science approach that we have applied that has gotten us this far. And so as I've mentioned, Wyatt, Dylan, and Tony are some of my biggest collaborators. And one of the things I'll leave you with too is I often think, how can I get more grant funding to the community, right? Like my ideal, I just completed this progress report, and it was for one of the internal grants, and I was able to see that 98% went to the community, which was really exciting because my percent effort was not covered. So I'm always thinking that, how can I get more money into the community? And one of the things that you can do is really make sure that you invite community members to conferences to present. We're going to be going to Scotland for Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, and Dylan and Antony, I'm carving out funds for my startup to make sure that they can go as well and present with me and have that experience to learn. So I think that's just something to plant a little seed. Giving back to the community goes a long way. And with that, I will finish. Thank you.